Greetings to all listeners. This is King Etchu, Pan-African activist from Ambazonia, aka Ambazve. Africans. I want to start by saying that Pan-Africanism is political. That is, it affects the politics of Africa. Pan-Africanism is philosophical. The philosophy of Pan-Africanism affects the continent of Africa. Pan-Africanism is spiritual, and if you notice, the spirituality of African people have been stripped away to the point where we think that we are Christians. Africans are Christians, or they belong to the Roman Catholic Church, which is found in Europe. But that's not true. So we as Africans need to take control of our spirituality and get rid of foreign religion and spirituality. Pan-Africanism is also economical. The continent of Africa needs to control the economy of Africa because many outsiders control the economy of Africa, which is why you can see many Africans running out of the continent of Africa to go to Europe, to go to Arab nations, to go to Latin American nations, go to the United States, you name it. The World Economic Forum was held on January 16 to January 20. It's over now. But there's a lot of information that Africans need to examine, need to look into. Because if they don't, they won't understand why things are happening in the continent. They won't understand why things happening in Europe, in the United States, in Latin America, in China, how it affects Africa. So we need to examine what was said in the World Economic Forum, understand it, grasp it, and implement it in our continent as Africa, or dispute things that we find insignificant, irrelevant in our perspective as African. So, and January 16 to 20, they held the World Economic Forum. But I would say that the World Economic Forum is more like, it should be named the Western European Forum. It's not the World Economic Forum. Because the nations that dominate, that control the agenda of what was spoken in the World Economic Forum was mostly from Western European countries. So it should be named, the World Economic Forum should be named the Western European Forum, not the World Economic Forum. Countries with the biggest share of the attendees of 2,658 people that attended in the World Economic Forum. You had United States that had about 27.2%, Switzerland that had 9.6%. attendees. Those people spoke in the World Economic Forum. 27.2%, which means United States pretty much control the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is United States baby. They have control over that. It's not, they dominate in the World Economic Forum. And you have Switzerland, which is also part of the Western nations. You have UK, which has 9.1%. You can understand why UK decided to leave Europe and became, more independent, because they could do things in a more, UK way, whatever you want to say it. So 9.1% attendees. So they had discussions, and they, the reason why they, they exited from Brexit or from Europe. Germany had 4.3%. India had 3.6%. India, a nation of 1.4 billion people, which is actually not the biggest country in the world, in terms of population. Only had 3.6%. They had some voice, but the voice was pretty much silent because, with United States having 27.2%, they spoke the loudest in the so-called World Economic Forum. You had France that had 2.6%, and in Africa, you only had South Africa that had 1.9%, which means that the rest of Africa was not even represented in the so-called World Economic Forum. But then again, how can Africa be represented in the World Economic Forum when they're not even members of the G20? So in other words, Africa, the voice of Africa was silenced in the World Economic Forum. Only South Africa even had a voice. And how much voice did it speak in? 1.9%. United States had 27.2% attendees. Those people that attended spoke. Switzerland, 9.6%. Those that attended spoke, but 1.9% from South Africa. Even if they speak, nobody's going to listen. And then the rest of Africa did not even have a say in it. In other words, the World Economic Forum is not the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is the Western European Forum. In other words, Western influence wants to dominate the world. They want to make sure that the world is unipolar. They have complete control over the politics of the world and over the economics of the world. In other words, where you have the resources in Africa, in Latin America, in other parts of the world, they don't have that much say in the World Economic Forum. So the World Economic Forum is not the World Economic Forum. It's the European Economic Forum that wants to use the World Economic Forum to control the world. It's a European world. It's a Western world that we live in. But many nations, even in Latin America, if you follow what is going on in Latin America, Brazil and Argentina are discussing of how to have a currency for Latin America where they won't have to use US currency to do business. This is the step of multipolar world that the people of the world want. This is the multipolar world that Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and other African countries are also getting involved. They need to be part of BRICS. Nigeria needs to be part of the BRICS, but Nigeria needs to step up and do more things so that they can be part of the BRICS. Egypt is considering to be part of the BRICS. Even Congo is a big country that needs to be part of the BRICS. What other country I could think of? You have Congo, Egypt, South Africa is already part of the BRICS, Nigeria. Those are the big nations in Africa. They need to be part of the BRICS to contribute to the growth of the continent of Africa. And we cannot allow Western nations to determine who we need to do business with and who we need to be partnered with. Western nations are part of the G7. African nations can also be part of the BRICS and also be part of other creation that they want to in order to push for a better economy for the continent of Africa. But what Africans did not notice or realize after the World Economic Forum completed or came to a complete stop, something that the Roman Catholic did, and I believe it's part of, and you could call it conspiracy theory. And I'm sort of a conspiracy theory myself because I try to look into things and put things together. But you might say it's a conspiracy theory. Right after the World Economic Forum completed, the Pope Francis, I believe that's his name. I don't give a fuck about Pope Francis or the Roman Catholic Church because I believe in African spirituality. I don't believe in religion. But as a matter of fact, the Roman Catholic religion has a lot of influence in Africa. The Catholic faith in the continent of Africa needs to separate itself from the Roman Catholic Church and create the African Catholic religion. And that goes with also the Muslims of Africa. They need to cut off from the Arab nations. In other words, Muslims of Africa need to create the Muslim of African religion, separate. If you look at it, there was at one point UK separated from the Roman Catholic Church and created its own religion, separate from the Roman Catholic Church. So African has the authority, the right, the dignity, the privilege to do that, to create a religion of their own, controlled by the continent of Africa, without taking information or taking decisions from the Roman Catholic Church or from Arab religion. In other words, this is what I'm trying to say. Right after the World Economic Forum was completed, right? The Pope Francis, made a statement about LGBTQ. You know, they talked about Pope Francis criticized the criminalization of homosexuality, and they says that that the Roman Catholic Church need to welcome LGBTQ. Why do you think that happened right after the World Economic Forum was over? And this was something that was televised, was discussed, was pushed forward, and then they move on to the next thing, because that is something they're trying to do. You could say it's a conspiracy theory that they are trying to push. They want to decriminalize homosexuality. Well, they have actually decriminalized homosexuality. But if you look at the Roman Catholic Church, they sleep with a lot of children. There's a lot of evidence out there that they sleep with a lot of children. They do a lot of ridiculous stuff that they say they're not supposed to be doing. And now they want to say that, oh, let's accept LGBTQs. They're all humans. Homosexuality is not a sin, blah, 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 blah. And they say this because many African nations are against LGBTQ. So this is something they're setting up to push in the World Economic Forum, so that African nations who are against LGBTQ will be pressurized to outlaw the criminalization of LGBTQ. As a matter of fact, in the World Economic Forum, there was several statements that were made. Somebody said this in the World Economic Forum. I don't give a fuck who he is. He said, we're not entering an era of deglobalization, but probably regionalization of globalization. Regionalization of globalization. In other words, Africa needs to work with nations of Africa to regionalize globalization, because we have benefited a lot from globalization, and now because there is multipolar world that is coming up, that is strongly being pushed by other nations, that is happening because of multipolar world. Those who benefited from globalization find that globalization is pushing surpass them. They don't have that much influence, that control. So they are trying to do everything possible to have that control over what is happening with globalization. So they say it's not an era of deglobalization, but probably regionalization. You could see Latin America trying to create a currency for themselves that would kick out the currency of United States being used in Latin America as the main currency. You could see Russia doing that already, China doing that already. India, in a way, I guess, is also doing that, you may say. Other bigger nations and other regions in other nations are working towards that so that they can have a currency. And Africa needs to do that. ECOWAS needs to have a currency that is not pegged to Europe, but it must be pegged to it needs to be pegged to the resources of West Africa. Same thing with Southern Africa. Same thing with East Africa. They need to peg it to their resources in order to enhance the currency of the regions in the continent of Africa. We need to get away from giving resources and money to Western powers like France. French African nation needs to kick out the currency of La Francophonie and create a currency through West Africa, through Central Africa, through East Africa, Northern Africa, and South Africa. We don't need one currency in the continent of Africa, but we need 5 currency that is based on the region and that it must be pegged to the resources of those regions in the continent of Africa. That is something that Africa needs to think about and actually do. We need to unpeg our currency to francs and other Western nations. This is what multipolar world is going to be and is happening. Other regions, other nations in other regions are doing it because they are tired of the tyranny of the US currency. We must do this as Africans. Multipolar world is the future. The Western world must accept it and stop thinking that they have to have complete control over the world using their so-called World Economic Forum. This is King Etchu. I'm out.